Hello and welcome to PGurus channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. Today we have picked somebody who's perhaps not in our usual list of guests. Someone who's very famous, someone who's very known for his outspoken ideas, thoughts, what have you. But he speaks his mind. Welcome Suhel Seth to PGurus channel. Suhel, welcome to PGurus channel.
Thank you, Sri. Delighted to be here.
So, Suhel, at the outset, we have truckloads of questions for you, and our viewers are a very nuanced lot. They ask very tough questions, and I hope that we are going to have this journey of a conversation where we'll come to know more about Suhel Seth, and the viewers also come to know the values you stand for, the ideals you stand by, and so on and so forth. Now, Suhel, I want to sort of set the context for this conversation. Um, uh, the title of today's conversation is What Happened After August 5th, 2020. That's just the title. But let us start first from your life. If you were to recollect 3 to 4 important dates in your lifetime with great national significance, can you please list them and say why?
I would obviously regard, even though I was not born then, but I would regard August, the intervening night of August 14, 15, 1947, as an important a date. I also believe that June 25 or June 26, 1975, when Indira Gandhi declared the emergency, was perhaps the darkest day for India. And it was dark because we as an entire nation kind of began to crawl when we were asked to walk. We sacrificed our self-esteem, we sacrificed our freedom of speech, and we became a nanny state run by who I think was one of the most damaging figures in Indian political history. She ruined every institution that India had built up over the years. I think a very important a day in my life was when Mr. Vajpayee became prime minister, for the reason that not only did you have a statesman occupy the highest office of the land, but you also had a man who was empathetic, who believed that you don't have to be disagreeable if you disagree. To my mind, August 5, 2020 will rank as the fourth most important day. And I want to, and I'm glad, and you were very kind in your introduction. I think we have to understand the significance of August 5, 2020. A lot of media in India and abroad has thought it to be a battle for a temple versus a mosque. A lot of people have believed that we are now inching towards a Hindu Rashtra. My view is very simple. Successive governments have invested their faith in the courts of India to adjudicate on this matter. The adjudication happened. It happened with the Supreme Court stepping in. And it was a substantive bench. It wasn't something that was done, by the sly. I think it's very important for India to recognize that post that judgment and what happened on August 5 was closure of an activity, of an issue that had continued to gnaw at our social fabric. It is not about Hindus versus Muslims, and that, to my mind, is the tragedy of the left liberal thought. My belief is that on August 5, 2020, you came to a level of closure, a level of national closure. The closure was on three issues. Number one, it was not about the birthplace of Ram alone. It was that this country is capable of settling issues through procedures established under our constitution. Number two, it showed the world that here is a peaceful transition or peaceful closure of an event. There were no riots, there was no screaming, shouting, vandalism, nothing. The third is it showed the maturity and the sagacity of this government. You didn't have any chest thumping that day. You didn't have any rara, see, we've done what we had promised to do. But the most interesting thing, Sri, is it taught me, and through me, I've tweeted about it, it taught the Indian electorate a valuable lesson. Nothing that Modi and his government have done was on the sly. It was part of their manifesto all people needed to do was to read the manifesto. They did not tell you that we would not do this. It was all in black and white. And everything that they've promised in their manifesto, they've done. Shouldn't we look for that kind of political framework? Or are manifestos just a document that is, held up but has no meaning? So I think these were the 4 or 5 nuanced things to my mind that reflected, that epitomized what happened on August the 5th, 2020.
You touched upon Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government. They conducted a nuclear test, and sure
Yes.
enough, there was a blowback from the West. Now, it appears like this August 5th, 2020, what happened, India is not afraid of anymore of whatever it will be discussed or however it will be discussed in the West. So that shows a newfound confidence and a certain amount of maturity on part of the Indian government. Do you agree with that viewpoint or not?
Absolutely. I think, see, without getting into political grandstanding, the one thing that Modi has achieved, which for the 10 years before he became prime minister, we were being bludgeoned across the world as seen as a crony capitalist economy, corrupt, blah, blah, blah. The average Indian today believes in the prime minister, believes in the government. Yesterday, a reputable television channel conducted a poll on performance. Again, Modi had enormous approval ratings. The fact that he's been elected a second term is again testimony of that. The second thing, Sri, is that we finally had and we've finally been given the framework to hold our head high, which earlier wasn't the case. So you're right, Indians are no longer squeamish about who they are. They don't need to be. Indians recognize that we are a functioning, robust democracy, and we don't need other people to tell us how to function. Third is the Western media, or at least parts of it, have been exposed for who they are. Trump calls them fake news many a time, but that's Trump. But the fact is that the narrative which was emerging out of an agenda has been established once again. You had newspapers from the West which have said Hindu temple on mosque land. That tells you how pernicious, how despicable, and how narrow-minded the agenda is. Not one of them said that this was a court-mandated decision coming from the same Supreme Court that the left liberals love to venerate. But yet, when it doesn't suit their agenda, the Supreme Court is also target of their ire, their venom, and their despicableness.
Well, where do you see this thing going? Because if you look back at the television shows, perhaps even as late as like 2 years ago, 2018, the upper class accented types will usually thumb your nose down on whatever it was that Modi was trying to do. And now they're caught in this uncomfortable situation. The left is barely hanging on to power in one state in India. They've lost power in Tripura. They were wiped out in Tripura, as a matter of fact. And so in West Bengal. So there is but yet there is something that is kind of still kicking in there's they're still feeling that, no, I am right and you're wrong. And even though my people in Supreme Court are not doing my way, my bidding, I still want to, keep saying that Modi is bad. Don't they have something else to do? In your opinion, how long can they keep on keeping up this rhetoric? Because the same people will write in New York Times, they'll write in Washington Post, they'll write in Economist. This charade has gone too long, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think this is a club that is past its use by date. This is also a club that is no longer relevant. What happens is journalists sometimes believe that they are the story rather than the story that they report on. Under the Congress, what happened was it was all people like us. The first thing that Modi did was he snapped any familial ties that people hoped that he would have. There are no favorites, and if there are, there are. That's how it is. But that cozy club is no longer relevant. So what the club does is it continues to shriek and screech and scream, not because they believe what they're saying is true, but only because they want to be heard. It's the proverbial joker or it's the proverbial clown, it's the proverbial backroom boy in class who will unnecessarily interrupt just in order to be relevant. I call these people cerebral disruptionists because that's what they are. They're intellectually vacuous, they are liars to a large extent, and they're only pursuing their own agenda. Now, here's a man who doesn't care. So, if you and I don't care about what people say about us, we will continue to do what we have been mandated to do or what we're committed to do. And that's the situation that these people can't handle.
Thank you for that, Suhel. Viewers, please send in your questions to Suhel. And we are just getting started here. We are 10 minutes into our conversation. Suhel is having a nice cup of tea, I think. So, chai pe charcha ho raha hai. And Suhel, a follow-up question on what you just mentioned. Don't you see a dichotomy here? If the Muslim vote is a block, then it's called consolidation. But when the Hindus do the same thing, it's called polarization.
So I think this is an excellent question. I want to dwell on this.
Sure.
On August 4 and 5, I sent out a series of tweets. One of my tweets said, and it's a valid point to my mind, is that for far too long, secularism in India was equated with the appeasement of minorities. The fact that we don't have a uniform civil code rankles me. Why? As a citizen, I believe if we are equal under the law, then we must be equal in every aspect. You know what Rajiv Gandhi did with the whole Shah Bano case, the U-turn, and that we have paid for continuously. What had happened, and this is why I blame Indira Gandhi as being the greatest destroyer of every institution. And Pandit Nehru was also partly responsible because of his issues with Jinnah. What has happened over time, Sri, is in order to be seen as liberal, you must be seen soft towards minorities and harsher towards yourself. But here's my question. If I'm a Hindu, which I am, and I'm a born Hindu, do I need to be apologetic about my status? No. Do I need to be fearful? No. Do I need to suffer in order that I'm part of the majority? No. Where is the logic track in all of this? So I've never understood. I mean, we understand the nuanced reasons for all of this, but I've always believed that even the Muslims, the Parsis, the Christians, the Sikhs will benefit from a majority that is happy and content rather than a majority that is seething. Because a majority that is seething will take out its anger on who? On the next community. And the tragedy is exactly what you said about polarization and balance. Secularism in India is when you appease the minorities. Communalism is when you stand up for the majority. If the irony of that hypocrisy doesn't hit you, I don't know what will.
You're absolutely spot on, Suhel. In fact, PGurus just published a story about two people belonging to the Valmiki sect who were stuck in Jammu for the last 70 years, 4 generations gone, where the only thing that they could qualify for was sweeper jobs and other such menial jobs. Extremely bright people who couldn't apply for government jobs because they didn't have a proper domicile certificate, and only now they are getting it. But the harsh reality was, up until now, Suhel, was that somebody from Rakhine could get shipped by train all the way up to Jammu, strategically located in an area in Jammu where the result was very this way or that way, a margin of victory of 300 votes, if you will, and then immediately given voting cards, election rights, everything, ration cards, everything. And now, when we try to point this out and correct this mistake, the same left liberals are queuing up in Supreme Court saying that they should not be allowed to go back. What gives, brother? I mean, this is at the height of irony here.
But look at the tragedy of the Kashmiri Pandits, Sri.
Yeah.
Look at their tragedy. I mean, you have ghettoized an entire community. You have banished them from their homeland. And when someone wants to correct those wrongs, you go up in arms. You had chief ministers of Jammu and Kashmir. Many of them have owned homes paid for by the government, even when in power, when not in power. I mean, this was living off the land like nothing else is. So when a guy like Modi takes steps, you suddenly raise your arm saying, oh my God, Jammu and Kashmir's integrity or its its purpose is under threat. The problem, Sri, is for far too long hypocrisy was under covers in India. Today, the government is willing to expose it. And when a government is willing to expose hypocrisy, it gets in and comes in for greater criticism than ever before. Because then people begin to wonder, oh my God, what next? And that is what drives more of their anger, their fear, and their articles which reek of an agenda.
Now, I just want you to take a few names here of people that are still continuing this anti-Modi rant. And we've already mentioned perhaps one entity, which is NDTV. The thing is, what do these people stand to gain? I mean, they know they have been, they are not getting any TRP ratings by doing this, yet they continue to spread these kinds of fake narratives. What gives, brother?
See, I think, as I said earlier, today what has happened is there are no junkets anymore. There is no special housing in Latian zone for, famous or infamous editors. No one is being given a soundbite. No one is being given a secretive, a tip. So none of that. All their perquisites have vanished. Today, even a Priyanka Vadra has been, moved out of the comfort of a Latian's home, which you and I as taxpayers were paying for.
Yes.
So in a society, when equality begins to creep in, the earlier privileged lot feel the most threatened. And that is what is happening today. And in order to ward off the threat, they don't talk about equality anymore. They confuse the inequality that they were enjoying as persecution. So today, if I'm a journalist who is, let's say, left liberal or Congress minded or whoever minded I am, and I'm not part of this narrative or not part of the normal narrative, I will say, look, no one is listening to me because they're persecuting me. The truth today is being confused for persecution. Equality is being confused for persecution because it suits their agenda. If this weren't the case, none of this would have happened.
Now, who is consuming this? Because, I mean, today with social media, right, it's a great equalizer. You'll always get the other side of the story.
So there are people consuming it. People in the West are consuming it. People who have an anti-Modi stance are consuming it. People who may be pursuing an anti-Hindu stance will be consuming it. There are enough consumers for hate. There are enough consumers for a fake narrative. And there are enough consumers for a purposeful or a purposeless, perhaps in this case, agenda. So that repository of people hasn't disappeared. But as you said, social media is not only a great equalizer, it is also a great contextualizer. It's a great reference point. A lot of these very people used to abuse past governments for the same misdeeds that they're abusing this government for. And at times, they used to praise past governments for the deeds which are today construed as misdeeds. So the hypocrisy is coming through, their false narrative is coming through, and their economy of truth is also showing through.
I have a follow-up on that. So why did the elite create this inferiority complex within the masses that whatever the Western world speaks must be the truth, and therefore you have to do things so that you look good in their eyes? Now, you yourself are in the business of mass mobilization. Why do you think Indians feel inferior and ashamed of their identity?
We've been made to. Please go back into history. Go back even before the British Raj, the Mughal Empire. We had enough people from within our societies who were willing to subjugate themselves. As Advaniji said at the close of emergency, that journalists were willing to crawl when asked to walk. We've always had a situation where we are looking for external validation. We believe that if the New York Times praises us, they must be the final arbiter and authority. Now, look at what happened 10 days ago in the New York Times. You had 2 successive editors resign, complaining about the shenanigans of the New York Times. Did it get much coverage in India? No, it didn't.
No.
Because we suddenly didn't want our gods to be discovered with feet of clay. They are our gods. We look for validation. कि भाई और लोग क्या बोलते हैं. That was also results-free because of the lack of confidence that had come into us for decades. That has changed today. Today, we recognize that we don't need an external validation if we are doing what we believe is right and if we are doing what we believe is by law. So that paradigm has shifted. So you will see that on social media, when these so called left liberals have a point of view which is either pernicious or untruthful, they get the full weight of anger or distaste behind them, which by the way they again blame to BJP or some other trolls. But the fact is, your common man has seen through your shenanigans. The common man now knows you for what you are. Finally, on this point, my issue is these are the left liberals who at every breath espouse the cause of democracy. They are the ones who say, oh, India is a democracy, we believe in the rule of law. When the rule of law mandates something that is not palatable to them, or when they diss the serving prime minister of this country, then I ask what respect do they genuinely have for democracy? Modi didn't sneak in through the back door. He's an elected prime minister. He's not a nominated prime minister. When the Congress was in power at a Asia Institute summit, I made the point, and obviously I had many corporate titans with me. None of them spoke. I said the beauty about Sonia Gandhi is she's in power, not in office. Manmohan Singh is in office, but not in power. Today, you have a prime minister who's in power and who's in office. Why would you begrudge that? Why would you hold it against him? Because it is the democracy, it is the people of India who have voted for this man. If you have an issue with the people of India. You can't be espousing values of democracy and then saying, no, but this man shouldn't be prime minister. But he's been chosen. Why don't you guys fight an election? So that's the tragedy.
So, Suhel, you've known Prime Minister Modi for many, many years. Viewers, for those of you who may not have known this, Modi was actually the PR lookout person when the BJP was in power in the in the 90s and 2000s. He was doing a lot of party work, and at that time, I'm sure he came in touch with you. What are your memories of Modi? And after perhaps you share your thoughts about him, maybe you can say 5 good reasons that these English-speaking intellectuals say what is bad about Modi. Perhaps you can share that too.
Yeah. So I first met Modi along with Arun Jaitley in 1999 when I was asked to work on the advertising campaign for Prime Minister Vajpayee. If you remember, there was a 13-day government, then Prime Minister Vajpayee for the election for 1999. And at that time, Modi and Jaitley would come to brief me. And we had briefing sessions starting at 4 p.m. because Jaitley would finish court and then, do the briefing. And over the years we met, and Godhra happened in 2002. I have to confess, a bit upset post Godhra, and I wrote 2 or 3 pieces. But, our relationship was on a different track. In 2008, I went to Ahmedabad to address the inaugural chapter of YPO. And I went and had tea with him in Gandhinagar in his house. And at that time, Modi says, look, I know what your views are. Forget that. I want to tell you that there is more development happening in Gujarat than you can imagine. So I said, great, tell me. And we sat for about 2 hours and he told me everything about what he was doing. At that time, he was planning the whole solar power initiative, gift city, redoing the Sabarmati river, shoreline, all of that. And then as I was leaving, he says, where are you going tomorrow? I said, I'm going to Bombay. So he says, please tell Mr. Tata that he should bring the Nano to Sanat. He says, because now they are no longer in Singur. I said, of course, I'll convey that to him. After that, I conveyed it to Mr. Tata, and Mr. Tata, obviously, whatever they had to do, they did, and the Nano went to Sanat. And I wrote in the Financial Express an article in 2008 in April 3 saying, this man will become prime minister. In 2008. Not that I'm Nostradamus by any stretch, but the point was that here was a guy who was deeply committed towards development. Here was a guy who was, yes, he was very rigid. But look, here's the thing. Leadership is about rigidity. Leadership is not about, submitting to everyone's whims and fancies. That is wimpishness. That's being a patsy. That's not being a leader. So for people to say, oh, he's very rigid, he's very firm, he's got to be. To manage a country of 1.38 billion people, you can't be a sponge. You've got to be someone who acts and acts firmly. So to answer the second part of your question, what are the 5 qualities? Number 1, and I've said this before and I'm saying it again, the man is squeaky clean and he's a committed nationalist. And don't use the word patriot, nationalist. Why? Sometimes you have to believe not only in the flag, which is the visual element of your national identity. You've also got to believe in the potential of the nationalism that you so-called espouse. Number 2, he is by far determined to do what he thinks is right. George W. Bush, post 9/11, said very interestingly, he says, I may have made a mistake, but the decision, when I took the decision, was a decision born out of integrity. So the third point is his integrity cannot be doubted. Number 4, look, he's a very, very hardworking man. Number 5, the guy is deeply caring about, to my mind at least, about the poor. He genuinely believes that they've for years been given the short shrift. Now the left liberals, or the so-called elite, have issues with him in 3 areas. Rahul Gandhi started, to my mind, a viciously wicked campaign when he said, Adani, Ambani, Soot Boot, Sarkar, all that rubbish. You tell me, Sri, how will you grow an economy if you piss off people who are running the economy? He cannot have an Auschwitz or have a situation where he wipes out industry. So it was a terrible argument on part of Rahul Gandhi to even attempt to make. The second thing is that he genuinely believes in the potential of the average Indian, and that is reflected in the way he's kick-started a lot of programs for India. The third, which surprisingly, you in your wisdom and with your intellect would have done it, but very few people in India have. The guy actually has no ego. Now imagine if I had an ego, I would disinherit, cancel out all the initiatives that an earlier government took. A Manrega is legacy of the Congress government. Aadhaar is a legacy of the Congress government. Now what has Modi done? Half the things Modi has done is he has brought them to fruition because they were great ideas, but the Congress was poor either at executing them or even imagining them. But yet they want to blame him. But that's how the narrative is. And the last point is, our current affairs writers are writing about the now and the today without reference to context. I'm a great believer, history without contextual reference is irrelevant. I can't talk about 1947 if I don't discuss independence or discuss the reason for a two-state theory that was propelled at that time. So that's where we are today.
Absolutely. And I'm reminded of what my friend Sanjay Dikshit said. There is no text without context. He's absolutely right. And I think you just seconded that. Yes. So the next question is going to be an interesting one. Now, year 2024, most of the people think that it's going to be another BJP government. Let's cast to 2029. Can you name 4 prospective PM candidates?
So before I answer that, I'll give you...
You can throw your hat in too. You have a few years to work on it.
I'll give you an original line of mine.
Yes.
I've always said India, other than Nehru, did not ever predict a future prime minister. Think about it. No one that we thought would be prime minister became prime minister, and who did become prime minister, we never thought they would. Up until 2013, middle of 2013, end of 2013, no one even imagined that Modi would become prime minister. So here's my thing. There is no doubt in my mind that 2024 it will be a BJP government. And let me tell you why. If you see what Modi and Amit Shah have done is they've strengthened the core of the party system. And the party system in a democracy is led by the cadres. It's not led by people like you and me or, by the leadership that sits in Delhi. Second, which is very important, is look at their penetration in states where they were completely absent. In the last elections, they showed you what they could do with the Northeast. That penetration is slowly moving in. Number three, the voter is becoming more and more educated and wiser when it comes to deciding on a federal issue versus a local issue. So today, the people who vote Modi to power at the center may not necessarily vote him or his party to power at the state, Punjab being a case in point. So I see there are great challenges ahead. There is no question in my mind that it will be a BJP government. Part two, Modi himself has set a retirement age, or not set it, but it's generally assumed that a retirement age would be there. So I don't know if Modi will be prime minister for the full 2024 term or partially, but there is no doubt in my mind that 2024 it will be a BJP government. Come to 2029, I really don't know, but I don't see the BJP walking into the sunset like we've seen the dramatic decline of the Congress. The reasons are as follows. Families have declining and ascending fortunes. Institutions don't. Unless an institution really screws up, its fortunes don't decline overnight. What BJP is doing slowly is it is institutionalizing its political narrative and its political agenda, which sadly the Congress has dissipated. So that is the essential difference. Will there be parties, regional parties? Of course there will be. Because, see, and Sri, you know this better than I do, across the world, identity has become a critical issue. When you see strongmen running countries, when you see the issues of national identity, that national identity emerges from regional identity. The guy in Texan must first want to feel proud of Texas before he begins to feel proud of America. I mean, you know that about the United States.
Yes.
That's happening across. So I don't see regional parties disappearing. But as I said, there will be two decision verticals. A vertical for the federal structure, which I think will be BJP, and for the local structure, whichever regional parties there will be. But the voter has clearly demarcated the two, which is a good thing.
That's actually a very astute observation there, Suhel. So let's say, pretend that you bump into your good friend Rahul Gandhi in Bangkok. What would you be talking about?
I'll just ask him, which is the crisis you have now left in India and hopped over to Bangkok for? But the chances of me bumping into him in Bangkok are pretty rare because we will have different purposes for going there. I'd be going there for the food. I don't know what he'll be going there for.
Now, you see, you are in a business where you have to develop a thick skin. You're going to get bouquets and brickbats and, more of the latter kind. What were the comments, whether it is in face-to-face or on social media, that were the sharpest that stung you that you can remember?
Oh, I could write a whole book. I mean, why? Even PGurus, your venerable organization, created a beautiful teaser for this program where I was smiling at the word being called cocky, pompous, battamiz. No, so there have been two instances that I can remember. Once was on a flight where someone said, "Oh, so where are you originally from?" I said, "From Calcutta." Suhel Seth. I said, "No, but tell me." "Oh, I've known him for long. He's a pompous, arrogant brat." I said, "How did you know him?" He says, "Oh, he used to come and train under me for theater. I've known him for many years." I said, "Oh, great." I said, "And what is your name?" He says, "Dharampal." I said, "Oh, excellent." So I said, "By the way, I'm Suhel." And the guy froze. Absolutely froze. So, there is this perception, but as I said, Sri, and I'm sure it is true of people, who are either successful, reasonably successful, envied, you will always get the brickbats and the bouquets. You've only got to remember one thing: the caravan moves on. It doesn't stop every time a dog on the street barks.
You
That's how
know,
you.
I have one observation. I remember watching you on Times Now in 2013 on an Arnab show. Those days, Arnab was less friendly and less kinder towards BJP than he is today.
Yeah.
And this was a talk about Nitin Gadkari, and he was still the president of the party. And a panelist asked me to ask you this question. You said that BJP had turned into Bhartiya Preeti Party. Can you expand a little bit on that?
No, that was, I think, the name of Nitin Gadkari's company, his private
Yes,
company. Now I
yes.
can't remember, but yes, I must have said that and gotten into trouble. Having said that, I must say that in the present government and in the last term of this party, Nitin Gadkari's done a superb job. So, see, what happens is we often get carried away on television, and more so than now, television in India has become so shrill, and the anchors speak for longer than the guests do. So you can barely squeeze in a line. So it's got to be a memorable line. So we're almost all becoming sloganeers when we are on television shows, but otherwise no one is heard. You're shut off at 10 seconds or 15 seconds.
Right. That's true. That's true. So, in your mind, who is going to be the next big guy jumping the Indian National Congress ship?
I think it will definitely be, to my mind at least, it'll be Kapil Sibal. Kapil, Shashi, they all need to. And I'll tell you why. See, there is, let's be fair towards the Congress. They ruled the country for many years. They must have done some things right. They must have done many things wrong, which is par for the course. But of late, what has happened is the ability to read the tea leaves has vanished. The ability to even face up to the truth has gone. For all her sins, Indira Gandhi realized that the emergency was a blemish from which she would never recover. When she came back to power in 1980, it was a completely different Indira Gandhi. I'm not seeing a different Rahul. I'm not seeing a different Sonia. I'm not seeing a different Priyanka. It could only be for two reasons. One is either they are in a bubble that is so removed from reality that they can't see the writing on the wall, or that they refuse to leave that sense of privilege and sense of entitlement. But a lot of intelligent people will not be able to survive in circumstances which are so severe. Because let's face it, Kapil is one of India's foremost lawyers, so he's fine. But these other guys are all career politicians. Milind Deora is a career politician. Jitin Prasad, career politician. Jyotiraditya left because he was a career politician. You're not going to work for a company that has just declared bankruptcy and being shuttered. You're not going to say, okay, I'm still on your rolls. Not at all. You'll look for a job. That's why I think there will be a run on the Congress bank of talent. It's sad because my other view, much to everyone's or a lot of people's dismay, is you cannot have a vibrant democracy if you don't have a meaningful opposition. Even Modi I would imagine when he gets up every morning, he must be also thinking, yeah, let me have a challenger who I can wrestle with properly. There's no point getting a walkover every day. Then you lose interest in that sport. And today what's happened is the BJP is getting a walkover almost every day. In fact, the people who are in opposition are the ones you and I discuss, the left liberals.
Right.
The opposition rather than political parties being in opposition. And therein lies India's conundrum, qua democracy.
Absolutely. And I agree with you that you need to have two strong parties to have a strong democracy. This next question is going to be an interesting one. Can you spot one similarity and one difference between a circus and a debate on an Indian news channel?
The circus has one ringmaster, so does the Indian television news because it has the anchor, and it has one joker, again, the anchor. So the difference is The difference is, in a circus, those guys get paid and we get entertained. Here, if we are panelists, we neither get paid nor do we get entertained, but it's the people who are watching who get entertained. That's the essential difference.
Question for you. Let's say you are planning on going to Ayodhya to do Kar Seva. Who would you be taking alongside with you?
Actually, I would love to take my mother, but that's out of emotional reasons. Or I would perhaps take, someone like, accompany Yogi Adityanath. But for me, look, I'm not a demonstrable Hindu in that sense. In the sense, I don't believe that I have to be at a temple in order to be devout or this thing. But I do go to places of worship. I do love going to pilgrimage sites. I think, to me, Ayodhya, as time goes by, as I said earlier in my opening remarks, Sri, would not only be representative of closure, it would also be representative of maturity and sagacity of a country such as India.
Question for you. What is the next big 8 p.m. announcement that you fear?
I fear every 8 p.m. announcement now. There is an 8 p.m. phobia. I mean, if someone from Bollywood were to make a movie and a horror movie, the title should just be 8 p.m. I think the next 8 p.m. announcement will be in 2021 on August the 5th on the Uniform Civil Code.
Oh, that's a great prediction. Let's hope it turns out to be true. Now, this is an interesting question again. Can you remember an interview host who you ended up bullying while being a panelist?
Oh, there have been several, several. Rajdeep Sardesai on The Big Fight, Vikram Chandra, who's a very dear friend as well, several, Karan Thapa. There have been tons. I can't even begin to count here. I mean, I've almost bullied every television anchor only for one reason. If you don't bully them first, they will start. So it's almost like a boxing technique. You've got to put them in the corner before they do.
An interview host that you would definitely like to ignore, and why?
I would ignore Piers Morgan. I would ignore Larry King. I would ignore all those guys. Within the Indian context, there are so many worth ignoring that I can't even name them. I would perhaps ignore, I don't know, actually, it's a very good question, Sri. Now that you, pin this onto me, if you ignore someone, you're also telling that person that person is worth ignoring. So my answer to your question will be, I wouldn't ignore any television anchor in India because they're not even worth ignoring. So why would I waste my time in doing that? But having said that, we have some very good television anchors now on both sides of the spectrum. Obviously, there are some, who have a particular view. There are some who don't. But some television news has become balanced. And as you rightly said, social media and the ability to reach out without the trappings of a formal structured studio setup or a formal structured political agenda setup, that process has begun. More and more people are branching out on their own.
So next, let us take a look at the American politics. The 2020 elections for the next president of the United States is taking some, hard lefts and hard right turns. Today, if election were to be held, the chances of Donald Trump coming back to power are looking iffy at best. Who, in your opinion, would be good for America and good for the world?
I think Biden, if he bides his time well, will be good. Look, let's give Trump his due as well. Trump was also elected. Everyone knew in all the run-ups to all the debates, all the presidential debates, he sounded unhinged, but people voted for him. What has he done in real terms? Other than the coronavirus, he's actually brought China on the mat. There is far greater American influence in the world today than there ever was. again, like Modi, in his manifesto, all the stuff that he said he is committed to doing. What has happened is, in the last few months, the management of Corona has been seen within America as management of a crisis, and there he's fallen short. People have begun to believe that he's not equipped to handle a national calamity. What did George W. Bush do post 9/11? Personally, not very much, but he did make that visit to Ground Zero. He did talk about an attack on Afghanistan, which happened. He did talk about Iraq, which happened. There was a certain firmness. But the point is that as far as Trump is concerned, in managing this crisis, he has fallen woefully short. Also, to my mind, he's not seen as someone who can seriously address an issue, and an issue as grave as Corona needed micromanagement. It needed addressing of a different order, which he's failed to do. But knowing politics as I do and as you do better than I do, I believe that it's still time. You never know what might happen between now and the 3rd of November. I don't even know if 3rd of November itself will happen.
You're absolutely right. So we don't know about that. There is a doubt about that too.
No, but he made a valid point. He says mail ballots are technically allowed to be opened a week after. So if November the 3rd is the last mail ballot that comes in, do you mean to say you will not announce the victor on November 3rd and then announce it on the 10th? And we've been through that in America before. The whole issue with chats, the whole issue with Al Gore and George W. So we've seen how the election process itself can be, a bit tricky. So I think the jury's out.
Yes, and we all know for a fact that the Republicans stole the Florida election and hence the US presidential election in 2000. Again, that's my viewpoint.
Absolutely.
See, because US elections, for the most prosperous democracy in the world, the election system is still flawed. Because even in 2016, Hillary Clinton polled the majority number of votes. And yet she ended up on the losing side. So we have to wrap our heads around that.
But that's because you've got the legacy of the Electoral College.
Yes.
So as that gets corrected, a lot of these issues will continue to bite.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree with you more. And that is a tradition that continues on, and I don't know when that's going to be reconsidered. The question, let's go back home. In your opinion, do you consider Muslims as a minority or a minor majority?
Okay, well, semantics apart, if you're a population size of 125 million, by no stretch are you a minority. A little known fact to most people across the world is India is the second largest Muslim population in the world after Indonesia.
Yes.
And we will slowly increase, we will outrun Indonesia in a manner of speaking within the next 5 to 10 years. I don't believe they are a minor majority or a minority in that sense, but yes, they are the smaller of the two, if you're comparing it to Hindus. I also believe, Sri, that this comparison came into existence more after 1947, because you had the Muslim state, which is Pakistan, and then you had people in India of Muslim descent. My whole view is that the Muslim community itself has had some remarkable people, but has never had remarkable political leadership from amongst them. What has happened is, go back into history, where there was Azad Saab. After that, you didn't have Muslim leaders of national stature who could actually create. I mean, you made them president. You had Zakir Hussain, you had Fakhruddin Ali Ahmad as presidents, but they are titular. You didn't have a political leader of the order that, let's say, the Hindu majority threw up. Having said that, if you see, there are too many splinter groups even within the Muslim community. The other tragedy, and this is a very important point that I'm about to make, it's also our tragedy. When it comes to Muslims, we seek a community leader. We don't seek political leaders. When it comes to Hindus, We seek political leadership because the community leader is irrelevant. You and I may not know the names of the 4 or 5 or however many Shankaracharyas, but we will know who is the head of the Jama Masjid. The Bukharis for years ruled the roost in a manner which was not exactly kosher. So, that is the paradox. So the Hindu majority has never been viewed through the prism of community leadership. The Muslim minority has always been viewed through the prism of community leadership because they didn't have any political leadership of great stature. Therein lies the dichotomy.
You actually segued me to my next question. See, when the United Kingdom writes about its grooming gangs, the world sits up and takes notice. But when Yogi Adityanath talks about love jihad, he gets trolled. So what gives? I mean, this is an attempt to try and answer your question, Suhel, in the sense that here is a leader who could be also the leader of the community.
Absolutely. But here's the tragedy. Go back into jihad. The word jihad. If you remember, post 9/11, the first attribution was made to Dick Cheney for saying jihadis. But then read many books on Islam, including one by Paul Johnson, where it says that the Quran says that jihad is not an invitation to kill, it's an invitation to die. There was paraphrasing done because of what had happened across the world. But then again, it is no secret that yes, not every Muslim is a terrorist, but most terrorists have, of recent vintage, been from the Muslim community. And that, to my mind, is both unfair to the entire Muslim community, but again, from within the Muslim community, there is no pushback. There was no pushback of the Osamas. Even today in India, we need political leadership from the Muslim community that is tied into the national agenda. You cannot have a Muslim political leader who talks about Muslims only, but not about India. Because then willy-nilly you're scoring a self-goal. You're suggesting that Muslims are not part of the Indian mainstream, and then when they're treated not part of the Indian mainstream, you can't be the one crying because the milk has already been spilt. Therein lies the logical fallacy of the politics of today. And tragically, Sri, no one in our country, be they intellectuals or intellectually innocent, no one is addressing this issue.
So this is a hypothetical, Suhel. We finish this interview and the phone rings. It is Mamata Didi calling you for advice on what she needs to do to win the West Bengal elections. What would you say to her?
I'm very fond of her. She's unhinged, but I've met her several times. She asked me to come on the advisory board of the railway board many years ago to discuss branding and all. She, again, is, to my mind, I would use the word petulant. She's that petulant child. But she has a heart in the right place, except of late, her politics of appeasement will give her a deathly blow. She doesn't recognize that by dividing the polity of West Bengal, you know what willy-nilly she's done, Sri? I was born and raised in Calcutta. For us, whether Sri was Tamilian, Malayali, whether you were, Bengali, Hindu, Christian, it didn't matter. The Bengali Bhadralok, also because of his moorings in literature, and Arya Samaj was founded there and all of that, Vivekanand, Aurobindo, the mother, what she has done is she's made that Bengali Hindu, the Bengali Bhadralok, re-examine religion and religious identity. She needn't have. She has created a self-goal for herself by her completely blatant appeasement of certain communities. This will come back to bite her. Because what the majority will say is, why the hell are we suffering just because you want to score political brownie points?
Good point, Suhel. So this is the last question from me, and then we'll take questions from our viewers. What does Ram, the word Ram, mean to you?
I think Ram embodies three important values: the value of ethics, the value of sacrifice, and the value of valor. And these three must be in each one of us. So there's that thing now, Hum sab mein hai Ram. If we have these three in us, the world is our oyster. To search for an existential thought, oh, what does Ram, and Ram signifies this. What did actually, if you come to think of it, even recent religions, be it Islam or Sikhism, ideally and ironic as it may be, they were talking about the same kernel. The kernel was one universality. When Guru Nanak talks about Ek Omkar, it's one universe. Hinduism for years has been a way of life. It is the only place which you cannot convert to. You're either born a Hindu or you're not born a Hindu. So I'm saying we have to examine our religious forwardness or our religious core from that perspective, that we were actually a faith. We were conjoined by the values that have been enshrined in all our scriptures. I was saying this in an international forum many years ago. Today we venerate the Warren Buffetts and the Bill Gates of the world for their philanthropy. Manu in Manusmriti, now almost 3,800 years ago, talks about it and uses the word dan. We had it in us. We lost it. We gave the world spiritual anchoring. We lost the plot. We gave the world inner thinking. We then went ahead and lost it. Because of our rush to embrace what I would call blatant Western ideals and Western values and Western notions, we actually gave up what we gave to the world. India was a compelling brand story, and India was a compelling cultural embracer. We then pushed the world away, got into a cocoon where we embraced values that were not real to us. And therein lay our tragedy. But today, hopefully, all that is changing.
Yes, indeed. Simple living and high thinking. Suhel, I beg your forgiveness. I want to ask one more question before we turn it over to our viewers for questions. What is your message to the Shaheen Bagh protesters?
You needn't have gone through all of this just in order to make a spectacle and put your community at greater risk. It wasn't a protest of any measure. It wasn't even a rebellious activity against the state. It was, Sri, to my mind, it was the most despicable form of protest within a democracy or within a democratic structure. And I'll tell you why. Every human being has the right to protest, but your protest must not sacrifice my freedom to move, my freedom to live, my freedom to earn. What Shaheen Bagh did was they'd restricted movement, shops were shuttered for months, and they disallowed people from earning a livelihood. You tell me, what humanism was there in that protestation? And I'm not even bothered about the political messaging that was being sent or was planned to be sent. That's irrelevant. What is relevant is of what human endeavor that you speak of when your humanism is so despicably low that you prevent people from living the normal, ordinary life that they're entitled to live.
Thank you so much, Suhel, for that wonderful sharing of thoughts. Viewers, we have a lot of questions to go through, and I'm sorry we cannot take any more questions. I hope you have subscribed to our channel. Remember that our channel is now being live on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, and we hope to reach you through every social medium that is possible. In fact, we are going to try and get Instagram going soon too. But it is important that you subscribe. It's important that Suhel feels that when he comes and invests 1 hour of his time on our channel, that it was worth it, that you heard what he had to say. Suhel is not someone who's free. He's a very, very busy man. And I really, really thank you, Suhel, for taking this time out to talk to us. Especially since
I'm a great admirer of you, of your work, of what PGurus has been doing, and it's a privilege, and I'm grateful for this opportunity. And unlike our Indian television shows, this was a great conversation, and I hope and believe that we can continue these conversations for the benefit of a greater intellectual repository that we can, invest in.
Absolutely, sir. Now, let's go to some viewers' questions. Gaurav Singh wants to know, what are your thoughts on establishing a right-wing ecosystem like JNU to counter pseudo-liberals and communists?
You don't need to establish something in order to counter something that is in any case dissipating. Plus, by establishing a counterpoint, you are making the point which is irrelevant even more relevant. So I don't think we need to do that. People are now seeing through this. Sri, finally, what I'm seeing in my very limited way, and you're seeing it at a much larger scale, I'm seeing that people are now the ability to separate the wheat from the chaff. They recognize what is real and what is not. And therein lies my hope. I don't believe we need to invest money in order to set up an ideological stream. We need to invest money in order to set up and harness and unleash the potential of the average Indian.
Suhel, the next question is a good one from Venkatesh. He wants to know how much damage has the bureaucracy politician nexus caused to the country, and what is your opinion about lateral entry into the bureaucracy?
I think it's a great question, Venkatesh. Quick answers. Number one, up until 2014, the bureaucracy politician nexus had crippled India. I think what Modi has done is he's put everyone in their place, and rightly so. People are now working harder. People are now being made more accountable. Also, the witch hunt is vanishing. Earlier, if you took a decision in all fairness and the decision proved to be incorrect, you were hauled up for life. That all has changed. And I genuinely believe that the bureaucrat today recognizes that there's far greater accountability. Sorry, what was the second part?
Lateral entry.
I think lateral entry is very good. Modi did it last year or year before he announced it, and I think it's a great move. There are a lot of people from the corporate sector who want to work in government, who want to give back to the society, who want to give back to the country. And I think it's all good. See, ultimately, it's not the drill. It's always the hole that you're looking at. Sometimes we mistake the drill for the hole. You buy the drill only for a perfect hole. Our objective is to have perfect governance. So there's that old saying, with forms of government let fools contest. That which is governed best is best. We need to encourage great governance. And for that, any model that can work is welcome.
Thank you, sir. Sopan Giri wants to know, for far too long, we have put the minority issues at the center of all our debates, but kept the majority issues under wraps in the name of majoritarianism. How can we change the focus, Suhel?
I think Giri is absolutely right, and we've discussed this in our conversation.
Yes, we did. A little bit.
We made majoritarianism almost look apologetic. We turned apologists. I think all that has changed. People have realized that it can't function that way anymore, and we're seeing that change. I think we have to get rid of all the isms. The problem with human existence is the isms take up too much of your time without intelligent planning for greater development. We have to look at a better world. We don't have to look at a world with greater isms or more tonality or polarization, as it were. And to that end, I think things are hopefully changing for the better in India.
So the next question is from Shailesh Sharma. Shailesh, you have two questions. I'm sorry, I can only allow one. I'm going to ask this question. What do you feel about the new education policy 2020? And what are the areas where the government will require to do more?
I think the NEP, and that, Sri, I'm not saying it, even the harshest critics of this government have praised the government's policy. We needed a national education policy. I worked at the behest of, Dr. Singh earlier on, just again pro bono with Mr. Ramdurai on the National Skills Development Council. And obviously that went for a toss because there was no great commitment on the part of that government to push it through. It was just another organization doing precious little. But there, one of the things I said was, and the slogan was, Agar hunar hai to kadar hai, which means we must respect talent. In India, for far too long, because of social mores, because of societal compulsions, we had become a degree-loving and a degree-respecting nation. B, failure was hugely castigated. All that, to my mind, has changed. So today, the national education policy allows for vocational training, for more gifted education, and to that end, it serves its purpose. Also, for far too long, we kept talking about an education policy, but we had none. We were a cookie cutter nation as far as education is concerned. And as Modi said, while discussing the NEP, you had people who had degrees but couldn't get jobs because they weren't trained for jobs. They were trained to go by rote in classrooms. So you needed that, effective fix of the education system.
Next question is from Ramesh Iyer. Prime Minister Modi has been the most despised figure among not just non-NDA parties, even before he became PM, but also by the Lutyens cabal. How can Prime Minister Modi quell the clout of this cabal?
He already has. He's won 2 elections. The cabal has almost kind of vanished. It's now only available in rag sheets or in some television studios, and he doesn't care. See, and I want to keep repeating this, and I've said this on the program earlier. If you give someone more relevance than he or she deserves, that person actually believes that they were doing the right thing. So you mustn't validate stupidity by giving it relevance. You must allow stupidity to die its own, aggravated death, if it were. And that's what's happened. The cabal has vanished. That's why the cabal, in some forms or the other, rears its ugly head, either taking the route of the New York Times, or the Washington Post, or the Economist.
Sanjay Khole wants to know, what's your view on typical Bollywood secular bombarding that has been happening for the last so many years?
Now, Bollywood is a reflection of who we are as a society. And a lot of it is so badly done that I wouldn't even give it much credence. But again, the same Bollywood can also be blamed for excessive jingoism. So, that's par for the course. But look, go back into history. Who was the first person who banned creative thinking? Jawaharlal Nehru.
Yes.
When he banned Sahir Ludhianvi. When Sahir Ludhianvi, in that famous poem, I think it was in Pyasa, where he says, "Kahan gaye wo log? Kahan hai wo log? Jo in sab cheezon ki baatein karte the post-independence." And then it was followed by his daughter, when the son, Sanjay Gandhi, banned Kishore Kumar. So we've had a history of, how did the IPTA movement begin? The Indian People's Theatre Association began as a matter of protestation. It was to encourage dissident thinking, much like Shakespeare under Elizabeth I. So, that session 3 we can have where we can discuss how literature and history intertwine.
Thank you for that answer. The next question is from Akash Pandey. Kerala is a conundrum. It is the most literate state, yet it also has the most number of people who are radicalized and have joined the ISIS. How do you decipher this?
Because radicalization, Sri, is actually an intellectual activity. It is not taking to arms. See, there's a difference. Now, let's go back into, not very far, but go back into recent history. Look at what happened with the Irish Republican Army. The IRA was taking to arms. It was not an intellectual or intellectualized activity. What we have seen over time, especially as far as the Islamic world in this context is concerned, is we've seen radicalization of the mind. That has happened through the madrasas, which many a time have been funded from Saudi Arabia because they have followed a very severe Wahhabian sect of Wahhabian thinking. So you have to go into how it has actually helped convert minds into, this form of activity. Kerala, because of its literacy, perhaps, I'm just putting 2 and 2 together, and because it has always had a more potent use of education, perhaps the madrasa system there is more heightened than anywhere else. Also remember that whether it is their menfolk who are of a certain age or not, there is always the propensity to leave the state of Kerala and go abroad for income enhancement. So there's already that belief that we have to do something out of the ordinary. Now, I don't know if that's the reason, but God knows.
Well, you are a very popular guest, Suhel. I can tell you off the bat. I have some of the highest number of questions being asked of you. I hope you can bear with us for another 5-10 minutes. I want
Another 5 minutes. You know why? I've got an 8-year-old child, 8-month-old child, for who I have to now do sleep duty.
Okay. All right. So 3 questions. That's it. Viewers, excuse us for not taking all your questions. The first one's from Ashwini Rao. Who, according to you, is the best Prime Minister India has had since independence, and why?
Too early to conclude thoughts on Modi. But, it's interesting that you asked me this question. What Manmohan Singh said of himself, that history will be far kinder when it judges me, can also hold true of Mr. Modi when, he gives up office. But I would say, in hindsight, in terms of Prime Minister, people will warm up more towards the Vajpayee years as the statesman poet. But if you ask me personally who's got more stuff done, there is no question that Modi. If you ask people of a certain older generation, they will talk about Nehru. And on Nehru, I just have one limited point, Sri, that for all that you might say about the man, he gave India that liberal streak of a kind. But obviously that found itself misplaced in its avatars. But I think Modi will be judged far better by history than he will be by his peers or while he is alive.
So this is the last question. Absolutely.
Prime Minister.
I'm sorry, I cut you off.
I'm saying he will be seen as the Prime Minister who did the most.
Thank you, sir. This is my last question, absolute last question. What are your ideas for reviving growth in India post-corona?
I think, and I've said this before, and I believe our finance ministry people got it horribly wrong. We tried to increase demand. We tried to increase supply. Our whole area of focus should have been to increase demand and increase consumption. And I'll just explain that in a minute. All economies function on the strength of consumer offtake. The problem is that the coronavirus has been the only thing that has been geography neutral in the last 150, 200 years that people contextualize on. What we've also seen is there has been not only uncertainty of health, there's also been uncertainty of livelihood. So it's both life and livelihood. I think in our country, while the Prime Minister had the right intention, perhaps, or whatever it was, we got it horribly wrong because the sops that we've given are to sectors that were already getting those sops. We needed surgery and we didn't need prescription. The problem is you've given all these hand-me-downs, but it'll be operation successful, patient dead. You needed a more different kind of inducement. Look at what's happening in the US today. The debate for the last 2 days in the United States is when that bumped up funding comes to an end, the $600 a week that I was getting, what is going to happen to the real economy? Okay, in July, the US economy has added over 10 million jobs. 10 million, was it? Or one? Yeah, 10 million.
Yes.
Over 10 million jobs. What is going to happen if the virus takes the spike that Dr. Fauci is talking about? So these are all imponderables. And what we are seeing in India today, and look, a lot of people have blamed Modi and blame this and blame that for the migrant issue. The migrant issue is actually a social issue. It's an issue that should concern you and me. We have treated our migrants poorly. We have taken advantage of them. We have taken them for granted. Today, we recognize the migrant issue because it is coming to bite each one of us. It is biting you because you can't get a carpenter, you can't get a plumber, you don't get workforce in your factories and in your plants. I believe that the government has not focused on 3 critical sectors. And these are 3 critical sectors, 3, that stare you in the face. We need to revitalize our entire MSME sector. That is the bulwark of India's economy. India's economy is run by the small scale, which feeds up. It's not top down. Number 2, we need to address the entire business of real estate and tourism. Sadly, these are seen as elitist because of our socialist hangover. These are the largest employers. They are also the largest employment generators. And they are the largest users of both skilled and semi-skilled workforce.
Yes.
Third is we need to reinvest and recalibrate healthcare. Within healthcare, we need to recalibrate public health, private health, and we need to recalibrate pharma. If we do all these three things, hopefully we'll be better poised. But I see a bloodbath for at least the next 3 to 4 quarters. I see lots of job losses, and I see the economy not doing as well as it should. But then again, who ever imagined that this would hit us so hard?
Yes, indeed. And from all of our viewers, Suhel, it was a wonderful discussion we had today. We would love to have you come back on our channel and talk more about various topics. You have been an excellent guest. In fact, the trailer that we put out for you wasn't exactly a complimentary one, but I think you took it in the right spirit. And thank you so much for being sportive. And that's the only word I can say. But again, Suhel, I made a new friend today, and I hope you think the same.
I'm so proud that you called me that. I'm so delighted, and thank you. And thank you to Vijayant, who made the initial call. And I can tell you, and this is not flattery, but I can say that of the many sessions that I've had, this was by far one of the most engaging. And it's been a learning experience because, Sri, you bring to your questions not only a worldview which is different from ours, but also a sagacity and maturity that is more wider and more encompassing. So thank you for having me. I was delighted to be here, and we should do this more often.
Absolutely, sir. You will be hearing from us very soon. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Thank you, Sri. Bye-bye. Good night.